there, my name is Lee, and I do deep analytical dives on whatever ADHD hyperfixation suits my fancy that week. Up until very recently, I wouldn't have considered myself a horror fan. Now that's changed. The Last of Us is the most impactful horror game in my life. The Last of Us wasn't even a game I probably would have played unless my wife had expressed interest in seeing me play it. Once the credits rolled on that first playthrough, man, we were bawling. But we'll get into spoilers later. First off, for those of you who may not know, The Last of Us follows the story of a smuggler and a survivor in the zombie apocalypse 20 years after the initial outbreak. At the very beginning of the game, Joel loses his daughter Sarah on night one of the initial outbreak. He is later tasked with escorting a girl named Ellie, who is immune from the disease, across the country to a group called the Fireflies, so they can develop a vaccine. Throughout the story, we visit many locations that have destruction, pain, and Joel and Ellie develop a pseudo father-daughter relationship. The game culminates in one final choice Joel makes and changes Ellie's life forever. It's really good, and if you haven't played it, you should. There are three main points I want to discuss today about The Last of Us. Number one, where the real fear of The Last of Us comes from. Number two, the game's universality allows players and backseat gamers, like my wife, to resonate with the plot and emotional turmoil in different ways in each playthrough. Because The Last of Us is a horror game made for everyone, and the plot and emotions meet you where you're at. Number three, how the real monster in The Last of Us are the people and not the infected. Section 1, where the fear in The Last of Us comes from. The Last of Us is not a horror game by the strictest definition. In fact, all of the marketing and all of the references that I can find online, including this screenshot, list survival horror as the last adjective for the game itself. For that reason, The Last of Us is more of a narrative experience about two people trying to survive. Why does this distinction matter? Because it allows the player to more easily put themselves in the character's shoes. Not everyone has dealt with a zombie apocalypse, but we've all encountered situations where the goal is to just make it through the day. I have a newborn son, and that's pretty common every day now. So if The Last of Us is at best a horror game second, why is it even on this list? The fear in The Last of Us comes from the moment-to-moment character interactions and what the implication of that plot is for each of the characters. You get scared when Joel is left all alone with Ellie after Tess dies. You get scared when Ellie has to break off from Joel in survival sections, and it's not the best option. You get scared when Sam gets infected and Henry pulls a gun on Ellie and Joel. You get scared when Ellie runs off after hearing Joel talk to Tommy about taking her to the Fireflies. You get scared when Joel goes on a murderous rampage because Ellie is in trouble. The fear of The Last of Us comes not from jump scares or darkness or some big monster. The fear comes from the feeling of uncertainty for how this moment is going to affect the characters and, by extension, you, the player. Section 2. The game's universality allows players, and backseat gamers like my wife, to resonate with the plot and emotional turmoil in different ways each playthrough. Because The Last of Us is a horror game made for everyone, the emotional moments meet you where you're at. Because the fear in The Last of Us is so easily grasped and enjoyed by so many people, that means a few things. The plot is made for you to feel things during important moments that a classic horror game like Resident Evil may not. Not that I'm saying Resident Evil doesn't have emotional moments. The Last of Us is only emotional moments. It becomes the rule, not the exception. The way these emotional moments feel is different for everyone, and the way those moments make you feel can change. I'm a huge fan of replaying games for comfort, and my wife and I play The Last of Us a couple times a year just because it's really easy to pick up and redo. Light mode is our best friend. I don't know how it ended up becoming a comfort game for us, but it is. Total side note, but it is complete bullshit where some of the Firefly medallions are located, like having to shoot into a random tree. I would have never been able to find that without a guide. I don't necessarily agree entirely with Naughty Dog's game design in that. So of course, because it is my comfort game, I had to replay the game entirely for this video. First, a little background. I recently became a dad. Yay, Lee! Playing through The Last of Us for the first time since becoming a dad hit me way different than it did prior to. First of all, I wouldn't call myself a stone when it came to emotions, but I used to be receptive to very specific types of emotions. We're getting into spoiler territory here. We already kind of have, but spoiler alert. Sarah's death at the very beginning of the game made me cry during this playthrough for the first time after having my son. Ironically, it's the first time my wife didn't cry at Sarah's death, but I don't know what that's supposed to say. Ellie's danger at certain points legitimately triggered my fight or flight because I could see my own parenthood in Ellie and the decisions she was trying to make and the decisions that Joel made. I think the fact that the important moments of The Last of Us can affect you in different ways the more you play it or where you're at in life is just kind of shown in these examples. I never used to feel this way about certain moments, and now I'm legitimately scared of points that I have not been scared of before. Certain moments can and will affect you depending on where you're at in life. Certain moments will be more poignant during certain playthroughs than others. This playthrough, we focused more on fear, just because that's the emotion that we were feeling. We've played a couple where, especially on super light mode, where it's just a comedy run because of how stupid the AI is. Things we focused on as far as fear goes were the loss of a child, the fear of being left behind, the impact of our choices on the world and the people around us, the weight of being selfish, the weight of being alone, and how our choices can alienate others while bringing us comfort. I think if you take one thing away from this part of the video, most of you probably have already played The Last of Us, but if you've only played it once, I implore you to play it again because it will make you feel a different way this time around. Final section. The real monsters in The Last of Us are the people, not the infected. I'm sure you've heard this one before, but I've always wanted to dive into this a little bit more in detail. From the first time that Joel wakes up 20 years after Sarah's death, we know we're in a different world. People will do anything to both survive and not get infected. Whether that's smuggling, killing, eating people when you're not getting enough food. You do what you have to survive. Very early on, this sentiment is proven when Joel tells Ellie they need to just keep pushing forward. Throughout the story, you see countless people kill each other over food and resources with very little remorse. Killing someone over a pair of shoes has the same sentiment as someone digging your car in a busy intersection. No harm, no foul. People have lost their sense of humanity after the outbreak. Now, where does this leave good and evil? This is really where I wanted to focus. We can select a very specific example of evil in The Last of Us. It's David, the real final boss of the game. David is the leader of a group of hunters. Hunters are bad dudes who scavenge, kill, and just kind of do anything they can to better themselves and their community. David is so far out of touch with humanity that he tries to R-word Ellie before cutting her up and feeding her to his followers. David does not look menacing or evil. David just looks tired, which I think is such a strong choice for a villain and an evil person, that he doesn't look mad-eyed or wild during most of his encounters. He just looks exhausted. Like his soul gave up a long time ago and his body is just acting on instinct. While David is a strong example of a human monster, the real monster may very well be another person. The game does a really good job of allowing us to not make the choices, but interpret how people's choices in game are good or bad based on how we're perceiving them. Are the Fireflies monsters because they have to try and find a vaccine and they're genuinely trying to do that with Ellie? David is obviously meant to be the embodiment of evil in the game, but I think we're supposed to see twinges of it throughout the rest of it. Let's think about Bill. He's clearly an expert survivalist and essentially has a whole town at his disposal. Is he selfish for choosing to save only himself? Is he evil for saying fuck you to anyone who has crossed his path? Is Ellie evil in this game for killing Riley when they both got bitten? Or is she a good friend for ending her suffering before it started? And most of all, is Joel the monster for choosing the selfish option of sparing Ellie's life at the possible cost of humanity's future? I think my favorite part of The Last of Us is mostly there is no clear-cut good and evil, no right or wrong. And each time we play the game, we're allowed to examine everyone's choices and decide for ourselves what we would have done in that situation and end up being swayed by that nuance. I think overall, The Last of Us is a masterpiece in storytelling, in character development, in world building. Maybe not so much in level design, but we'll talk more about that in a deep dive on my channel, Lee Sorrows 8, link right here, link in the description, link somewhere I don't know, later in October. Keep an eye out for that video. If you like this style of content, again, my name's Lee Sorrows. I do deep analytical dives on whatever content I fancy this week. Some of my most recent videos include a deep dive on how Mickey from Mickey Mouse Clubhouse is kind of a bad dude, some of the numbers behind Sesame Street, and a ranking of all of Astrobot's best bots.